Nonso shook his head in disbelief. What happened to you, Chichi? I never knew you to be like this. What happened to me is that you are giving her too much attention, more than your own children. Yes, we wanted her, but that was because we did not have children. Now we do. So you can take her back to wherever you got her from. Nonso and Chichi had been married for 7 years. Their union was built on love, and they dreamed of a lively home filled with laughter and children, mini versions of themselves. In their early years, they basked in the bliss of their companionship, convincing themselves they were just waiting for the perfect moment to start a family. But as the years crept by, the silence in their home grew louder, and the absence of tiny footsteps became an aching void. At first, they were not worried. We are just taking our time, they reassured themselves, and anyone who cared to ask. They had always imagined they would have children in their own time. But by the 3rd year of marriage, worry began to set in. When their efforts yielded no results, they sought answers. Doctors examined them thoroughly, yet every test returned with the same frustrating verdict. Nothing was physically wrong with either of them. Desperate for a miracle, they turned to prayer houses, spending sleepless nights crying out to God. They clung to each other as they moved from one pastor to another, collecting bottles of anointing oil and holy water, each promising that their breakthrough was near. But the years passed and nothing changed. What made their pain harder to bear were the questions from strangers. "You two look amazing together. How long have you been married?" They would ask, their faces lighting up with admiration. Nonso and Chichi would smile politely and answer. Then came the dreaded follow-up. "Wow, that's beautiful. How many kids do you have?" Each time, Chichi's heart would sink, her smile faltering as she struggled to hold back tears. It felt like salt being rubbed into a fresh wound. Nonso, ever the supportive husband, would squeeze her hand and quickly steer the conversation elsewhere. He adored Chichi. They had been inseparable since their high school days. They were secondary school sweethearts, and he was determined not to let their struggle divide them. When friends suggested he test his fertility with other women, Nonso shut them down. "God's time is the best," he said firmly. "If the doctors say there's nothing wrong with us, then we'll wait for our blessing." Chichi was not only blessed with a good husband, she was blessed with the best mother-in-law that one could ask for. The woman was a deeply religious and kind-hearted woman. "Leave everything to God," she often told Chichi, holding her hands tightly. She even organized fasting and prayer sessions, sometimes involving the entire church groups. She brought home oils, waters, and prayers from her so-called strong men of God across the country, insisting they would bring a breakthrough. Chichi was made to drink some and rub some on her belly, but still nothing worked. As the 7th year of their marriage approached, the couple began to consider a different path. After much prayer and discussion, they decided to adopt. Their financial stability made the process smoother. Nonso's thriving building materials business and Chichi's position as a reputable teacher ensured they could provide for a child. Within 6 months, their dream took a new shape in the form of Kosara Chukwu, a 6-year-old girl with bright eyes and an infectious smile. Her name, meaning "talk to God," felt like a divine message. Kosara's story was a tragic one. She had lost her parents in a car accident when she was just a year old. Her mother was an only child, and her father's family cared less about her. For according to them, what do we do with a girl child? With no relative willing to care for her, she had been placed in an orphanage where she remained for years, waiting for someone to choose her. But despite her hardships, Kosara was a ray of sunshine, always smiling and quick to make friends. Nonso and Chichi welcomed her with open arms, showering her with love. Though some members of Nonso's family grumbled about the adoption, the couple paid no mind. As far as they were concerned, Kosara was their daughter in every sense of the word. Kosara was indeed a blessed child. As soon as she came into the family, Nonso was doing well normally, but the profits and patronage tripled. He sold building materials in the popular city of Onitsha and usually pursued contracts from the government engineers or investors seeking to build big companies or houses. The market was very competitive, and sometimes you had to pay your way through to these big investors. But since Kosara came into their lives, contracts started coming in from left and right. Even Chichi got promoted from her job as a subject teacher to a principal. The couple pampered Kosara, and she lacked nothing. She attended the best school and wore the finest clothes. The most interesting thing about the girl was her spirit. At a tender age, she had a strong spirit and loved to talk to God. She was raised in a missionary orphanage where praying was like breathing. She learned from a young age to pray, and unlike some of the other children who saw prayer as a Herculean task, Kosara actually enjoyed it. She talked with God every day as if he were right beside her, as if she could see him. And if you did not know better, you would think she was possessed. The only thing which seemed to be a problem was that Kosara was not book intelligent. They had several lesson teachers just to help her improve in her academic performance, but nothing was sinking in. Regardless of the situation, the couple loved her dearly. The small family continued to live together happily until a few years later when Kosara turned 10. The girl was too mature for her age. She had a strong spirit and had the ability to sense when a person was sad or when there was a burden in a person's heart. Chichi loved her daughter, but deep inside her, she still wanted a child of her own, and sometimes it made her sad. She did her best to mask her feelings when Kosara or her husband was around, but the young girl could see deep inside her mother's soul. She could see the sadness in her heart, and somehow she knew why. One day, after everyone had gone to bed, Kosara could not sleep. She couldn't help thinking why her parents had no children of their own. After tossing and turning for hours, she became thirsty and wanted a cup of water. Just as she approached the kitchen, she heard some sniffling sound, as if someone was crying. She moved cautiously, and as she entered the kitchen, there sat her mother, crying, trying to be as silent as possible. Kosara went and sat beside her at the kitchen table. Chichi was shocked. She had not been expecting anyone to be awake at this hour, especially Kosara. "What is the problem, Mommy?" Kosara asked. "Why are you crying?" Chichi quickly wiped her tears, insisting it was nothing. But the little girl knew better. She had heard people talk when they thought she was not listening, and so she knew that her parents had adopted her after years of childlessness. "Don't worry, Mommy," she said. "I'll talk to God for you." That night, as her mother sent her off to bed, she made a mental note to talk to God about it. Kosara knelt by her bed and whispered a prayer, her childlike faith shining brightly. "Dear God," she began, "please bless my mommy and daddy with a baby. Twins would be nice, so we can all be happy and I can have siblings to play with. Thank you for listening, God. I know you will answer soon. Good night." As she climbed into bed and drifted off to sleep, a quiet peace filled the room, as though her simple prayer had reached heaven's gates. Truly, Kosara's prayers soared to heaven's gates, and the answer was swift. 2 months later, Chichi began feeling unwell. It started with fatigue, waves of nausea, and an unusual loss of appetite. Dismissing it as the familiar cycle of typhoid or malaria, she resorted to over-the-counter medications, certain that they would soon make her feel better. But her condition lingered, stubborn and unyielding. Pregnancy was the last thing on her mind after years of trying and countless disappointments. She had stopped entertaining the possibility. She had even lost track of her monthly cycle, so it never crossed her mind to connect the symptoms. When the sickness refused to subside, friends and family urged her to visit the hospital. Reluctantly, Chichi went, expecting to be handed the usual prescriptions. But after a series of tests, the doctor delivered an unexpected verdict. She was 8 weeks pregnant. Chichi stared at him, her heart pounding. "Doctor, that's not possible," she stammered, shaking her head in disbelief. "We've tried for years. There must be a mistake." The doctor's lips curled into a knowing smile. "I understand your skepticism," he said gently, "but the tests are conclusive. I would suggest an ultrasound, but it's still early and you may not fully grasp what you're seeing yet." Though he kept his tone professional, even the doctor was quietly astonished. Cases like this were rare, but not unheard of. As a man of faith himself, he saw this as nothing short of a miracle. When Chichi returned home, her hands trembled as she clutched the test results. Her voice quivered with emotion as she shared the news with her husband. and daughter. Nonso was stunned into silence. For a moment, his eyes were wide with disbelief, then overwhelmed with joy. He pulled Chichi into his arms, tears streaming down his face. "This is God's doing," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "and it's marvelous in our eyes." Kosara was ecstatic. She twirled around the room, clapping her hands and laughing. Later that evening, during her bedtime prayers, she knelt by her bed and whispered, "Thank you, God, for answering my prayer. You are the best. Please help my mommy and daddy take care of the baby or babies if you want. Amen." As the months went by, the family prepared with excitement and gratitude to welcome their new addition. Friends and relatives, some of whom had doubted they would ever have a child, showered them with congratulations and prayers. Finally, the long-awaited day arrived, and it brought with it a double portion of joy. Chichi gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The boy arrived first, wailing loudly as if to announce his presence. Moments later, his sister followed, her soft cries filling the room. The couple was overwhelmed with emotion. Nonso cradled his newborn son, while Chichi held their daughter, their hearts bursting with love and gratitude. "God has given us a double for our waiting," Chichi murmured through tears, her voice barely audible over the joyful cries of the babies. To celebrate the miraculous arrival of their children, the couple hosted a grand party. The event was lavish, with music, dancing, and food flowing in abundance. Friends, family, and even distant acquaintances turned up in droves, eager to join the celebration. The joyous atmosphere was electric, as everyone marveled at the couple's story. What no one knew was that it had taken the simple prayers from the heart of a young girl to move the heavens. Chichi embraced her role as a new mother with enthusiasm, pouring all her energy and love into caring for her newborn twins. She resigned from her position as the principal, determined to devote herself fully to her children. At first, her shift in priorities seemed natural, even admirable. But as time passed, it became evident that her affection for Kosara also had diminished. The change was subtle at first. Chichi grew irritable and snapped at the girl for minor mistakes. One day, Kosara accidentally broke a plate while attempting to wash the dishes, an activity Chichi had never allowed her do before. Chichi's reaction was swift and harsh. She flogged Kosara as though the little girl had committed a grievous crime. When Nonso returned home that evening and saw the welts on Kosara's arms, he was livid. "Chichi," he bellowed, "this is unacceptable. Kosara is our daughter, the first child in this family, whether you like it or not. How dare you treat her this way?" Chichi said nothing, but her silence was heavy with defiance. To her, there was no issue with how she was handling things. She was entirely consumed by her twins, fussing over them like a protective hen, while pushing Kosara further into the shadows. Kosara, once the apple of her mother's eye, now felt like an outsider in her home. The little girl, who had once dreamed of bringing happiness to her family, now carried a heavy burden of guilt, believing she had somehow cursed herself. She became so sad. She sought solace in her nightly conversations with God, but even those felt hollow. "Did I ask for too much?" she would whisper, tears streaming down her cheeks. The neglect became more apparent as the babies grew. Chichi moved Kosara from her spacious, beautiful decorated room upstairs to a cramped and less comfortable room downstairs. When Nonso, who had been on a business trip, came back and discovered this, he exploded in anger. "You see this thing you are doing?" he said, his voice trembling with rage. "God is watching and he will judge you accordingly. What is the meaning of all this, Chichi?" But Chichi was unbothered. If anything, she seemed emboldened by her husband's disapproval. She wanted her daughter to be comfortable in her own father's house. It was as though the birth of her biological children had unearthed a side of her that no one had seen before, a side that made people question whether her love for Kosara had ever been genuine. The situation worsened when Chichi proposed something unthinkable: returning Kosara to the orphanage. "We have our own children now," she argued. "Why should we continue to keep her here?" Noso was aghast. "What is happening? Have you lost your mind, Chichi? Can't you see how blessed we've been since Kosara came into our lives? She is a part of this family, our daughter, our first child." "Blessed?" Chichi retorted, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "And you think it's because of her? I prayed for all these. I prayed for these children. I cried to God and he answered me. Don't give credit to that girl for what only God can do." Kosara listened to the heated exchange from the kitchen where she was washing dishes. She felt her heart break into pieces. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she scrubbed the plates with trembling hands. The one person who still treated her with love was her father, but his business trips often left her at the mercy of Chichi's wrath. That same year, Kosara finished primary school, and without her husband's knowledge, Chichi went and enrolled the girl into a nearby public school. Nonso was furious when he discovered what had happened, but Chichi's tongue were as sharp as usual. "The girl is too dull for my liking. She does not know a single thing. So why should I waste money sending her to those expensive schools? Nothing can come out of that girl's brain." Nonso was not taking it lightly. He looked at his wife straight into her eyes. "The money should be my problem, since I am the one making it, not yours. I'll be going on another trip tomorrow, and by the time I return and meet my daughter in that rickety school, God help you, I will make sure you spend the night in your father's house." Chichi knew when her husband had reached his breaking point, and so she reluctantly withdrew Kosara from the public school and put her in one of the prestigious secondary schools right there in Onitsha. But even the school was a nightmare. She was always looking unkept. Her bag was worn out, and the shoes were another issue entirely. The kids in school teased her mercilessly. Sometimes they made a caricature of her and played silly games like throwing her torn bag around the class from one hand to the other while she cried and begged them to stop. Kosara had no joy anywhere, not at home, not in the school. Her life continued this way for years. As the twins grew, they became Kosara's sole responsibility. She was the one to give them a bath, prepare their food, feed them, and whatnot. She was there at their beck and call. The boy, Chizaram, was just like his father, kind and calm. But you see, Chinaza, the girl, was a burning fire, so rude and disrespectful. And each time Kosara cautioned her, Chichi did not take it lightly. And so the girl, who was already growing into a woman, swallowed everything. Kosara swallowed her pain, hiding her tears and bottling up her emotions. The once free-spirited and joyful girl who had brought so much light into the family now lived in a dark cloud of sadness. Still, she clung to her faith, whispering prayers to a God she hoped was listening. It was the only thing that kept her spirit from breaking entirely. But even in all of these, Nonso's love for Kosara did not waver. He loved her dearly and showed her in every way possible. The fact that she still had clothes to wear was his doing. Any form of luxury that she had access to was because of him. He loved her so much and knew that she was a special child. Whenever he was home, they spent so much time together, catching up on the times they had lost. And this made Chichi uncomfortable. She felt that Nonso gave the girl more love than his own biological children. She swore to make life so difficult for Kosara that she would have no choice but to live on her own. When her husband was away, she made sure that even though they had a maid who came in every morning, Kosara did every single household chore before going to school. She ended up getting to school late and sleeping through lessons. Her academic performance, which was nothing to write home about before, became even worse. Whenever she was asked a question in class, she always never knew the answer, and the other students would take the opportunity to laugh at her. Her performance became so bad that the school management, after so much deliberation with her parents, advised her to withdraw. She had repeated lots of classes. They had conducted several lessons, but it seemed nothing was going to change. Chichi had a field day that day. She kept going on and on about how she knew that Kosara would amount to nothing. She called her a waste of effort. Kosara's heart broke into pieces once more. She cried so hard that day that even her father could not console her. She cried to God. "I thought we were friends," she said. "Why would you let me go through all of this? What have I done to deserve this?" At that moment, it seemed that God was silent, but he was not. He was only waiting for the right moment to show himself. At that time, Kosara had already turned 18. Her education was very slow because of the classes she had to repeat. And yet, she was still unable to finish even secondary school. This worried Nonso, but he did not want her to just sit at home and while away her time, especially since he knew his wife very well. And so he decided that she should join him in his business. When Chichi heard this, She laughed out so loud. Hey, someone that does not know simple arithmetic should join your business. Ha! She should better go and learn maybe tailoring or hair making or perhaps petty trading or something. After all, if we had not rescued her from that orphanage, she would never have dreamed of this kind of life. Nonso shook his head in disbelief. What happened to you, Chichi? I never knew you to be like this. What happened to me is that you are giving her too much attention, more than your own children. Yes, we wanted her, but that was because we did not have children. Now we do, so you can take her back to wherever you got her from. Nonso was stunned, speechless. He did not expect such an outburst, especially not in the presence of the girl. There and then, Nonso made up his mind to do everything in his power to make sure that Kosara got the kind of life that he had promised her. That night, Kosara went to her father in his private room, where he went whenever he wanted to be alone. She could sense that he was not happy. His family was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it from falling. Kosara knew that the only way she could help was to disappear, just like her mother wanted. She knelt before him. Daddy, I know you love me, but I beg of you, I don't want to be the reason this home falls apart. Yes, I feel so sad inside of me, but it would break my heart if this home falls into shambles. Please let me go. It will be very difficult, but I will find my way with God by my side. Nonso looked at her tenderly. He could see the unshed tears in her eyes. He shook his head. We may not have the same blood flowing through our veins, but come rain or shine, you are and will always be my child, my first daughter. You have my name, and whatever benefit I would give my child is yours. You are mine, Kosara Chuku, and nothing can change that. So my answer is no. Kosara was about to argue, but the look on his face made her think otherwise. She thanked him for loving and caring for her unconditionally and went to bed. From that day forward, Kosara joined her father in the business, and surprisingly she learned very fast. She calculated money so well, even without the need for a calculator. In less than a year after she joined her father's business, the business flourished so well that they had to establish more stores in different parts of the country and even some other African countries. She became so good with the business that her father could leave it in her care and travel for days or even weeks as he pleased. He even often bragged to anyone who cared to listen that his daughter Kosara was worth more than 10 sons. Everything Kosara laid her hands upon was blessed. Things finally started to look well for her. But remember, the devil is never happy when God's children begin to prosper. One day, a very handsome young man walked into one of Nonso's stores in Onitsha building materials market. Nonso was on a trip to sign a contract in Ghana, and so the man was attended to by Kosara herself. From all indications, the man was as an important person, else the sales boys would have attended to him and there will be no need to bring him into the office. Kosara, in her polite and cheerful manner, attended to him, and it turned out to be that he was an engineer, looking to start an estate project and was referred to their office by a happy customer. He was happy with the way Kosara handled the business, and in less than an hour, a contract was signed. Unknown to her, she had left a lasting impression on the young man, whose name was Pascal. Pascal was not just taken by her beauty, but by the way she carried herself with confidence, the way she smiled when she talked, the way she spoke with so much intelligence and knowledge of the business, and her simplicity. He knew that he wanted to know this young lady. The next day, he came again. This time, he made it clear to her that he was not there for business. He wanted them to be friends. Kosara knew what he wanted, but she was not interested, and so she turned him down politely. However, Pascal was not one to give up. At the close of work that day, as Kosara came out of the market gates to begin her journey home, there stood Pascal beside his shiny black jeep. Apparently, he was waiting for her day to be over so that he could shoot his shot again. Still, Kosara turned him down. But the young man did not give up. He determined in his heart to continue pursuing her. He waited for her to close work every day until one day, 6 days later, she agreed to have dinner with him. Nothing serious. He took her to a fancy restaurant where they ate and talked. Kosara got caught up in the moment and they talked for long hours. After they had finished eating, she let him drop her off at home and assured him that she had a nice time. That day was the beginning of something new for the young adults. They saw each other at the close of work at least thrice a week because she had different branches of stores in Onitsha to oversee, and he also had a lot of work to do. But they talked on phone every day for long hours. The both of them started bonding, and none of them could tell exactly when they moved from being friends to becoming lovers. Pascal showered her with gifts, and when he met her parents, Nonso welcomed him with open arms, while Chichi acted cold. Chichi could not contain her jealousy. Kosara had access to her father's finances, and sometimes Chichi needed to call her if she needed money. And now, she had this rich man all for herself. Chichi knew that she had to do something quickly, else the girl would become untouchable. Out of jealousy, Chichi planned with some dangerous men. One of her friends introduced her to and paid them handsomely. The plan was to abduct Kosara on her way from work and do away with her for good. That day, she was supposed to meet with Pascal, and so she just stood by the roadside waiting for him to pick her up. The men who had been following her in the black van waited for the right moment, when the road would be free, and then they attacked. It happened so fast. One moment she was looking at her wristwatch. The next moment she was swiftly dragged into a black van and the car sped off. The men successfully abducted her, and when they reached their hideout, an uncompleted building in the middle of nowhere, the men called Chichi to confirm that they had the right girl. Chichi demanded to speak with Kosara just to gloat. "Well," she began, "isn't this Daddy's precious girl? If you had left just like I wanted you to, then it wouldn't have come to this, but you were too stubborn. I believe now is good riddance to bad rubbish. Kill her," she instructed the men. Kosara pleaded for her life, But the men were known to show no mercy. They paid no heed. They pointed the gun to her face and pulled the trigger, but the gun did not fire. They pointed the gun elsewhere to the ground, and it fired. They tried to shoot again, severally, but all their guns did not fire. The men became frustrated. One of them suggested they used a knife, but when he raised the knife up, his hand could not come down. It was as if a force held it there. Deeply terrified, they left all their weapons and ran. It was late into the night when Pascal brought Kosara home. Earlier, when she came out to a busy area, she had dropped her bag when the men took her, and so she had nothing with her. Thankfully, she knew Pascal's phone number by heart, and so she called him with a stranger's phone. The kind woman told her where she was, and she relayed the message to Pascal so that he would know where to pick her from. By this time, Nonso was already losing his mind. Chizaram, her brother, was in tears. Chinaza was less concerned, while Chichi had fake tears in her eyes, trying to console her husband. Suddenly, they heard the gates open, and they all rushed to the window to see Pascal's car pull up, to their greatest surprise. Kosara stepped out of the car. Nonso nearly collapsed with relief, and Chichi was frozen in shock. She wanted the ground to open and swallow her. She thought about running, but there was nowhere to run to, nowhere to hide. When Kosara entered the house, she was filled with rage. No one had ever seen her angry before. Nonso moved towards his daughter. "My angel, what happened to you?" Kosara exploded. "Ask that wicked woman you have as a wife." She turned towards Chichi, who was already shivering. "What have I ever done to you? All I wanted was for all of us to be happy. I knew you were sad. I so desperately wanted you to be happy. I talked to God, just like I promised. I begged him to give you a child, specifically begged him for twins that night, just because I wanted us to be one big happy family. God listened and gave you twins. But you have made it your life's mission to make my life a living hell, to make my life miserable. I was willing to endure anything you threw at me, but you have gone too far. What will my death profit you?" Nonso, who had been listening, patiently gasped. "What is going on here?" he asked impatiently. "She's too afraid to talk, so I'll help her. Your wife hired men to abduct and kill me. She even told me good riddance to bad rubbish over the phone." She turned to Chichi again. "What you did not know is that I am a child of grace. I will only die when God says so. Did you not hear how I survived the accident that killed my parents? Oh yes, they said I was in that car with them. The car was crushed beyond recognition, but I came out unscathed. I came out unscratched. I survived because I had a purpose." Chichi was already in tears. She fell on her knees, pleading for forgiveness, but her actions were too grievous. Nonso was furious and insisted she would go back to her father's house. Chichi pleaded and pleaded, but his mind was made up. He had had enough of her. The next morning, she packed all her things, and to her greatest surprise, none of her children were by her side, not even her daughter. They saw their mother for who she truly was, and the image was not one to be proud of. As Chichi left the house, Kosara stood by the window, watching silently. She felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for what could have been. Life moved on, and Kosara took charge of the family business with even greater determination. Under her leadership, the business flourished, and she began mentoring her younger brother, Chizaram, to eventually take over when he was of age. Chinaza, humbled by the events, reflected on her mother's mistakes and chose a different path. She grew into a kind and graceful teenager, much to everyone's relief. As for Pascal, his love for Kosara only deepened with each passing day. He learned new things about her, and each time he fell in love with her over and over again. The both of them eventually got married and started their journey to forever, building a home filled with love and laughter. Nonso, Chizaram, and Chinaza found peace and unity in their family, finally free from the shadows of the past. And so Kosara's story became a proof that no matter the trials, grace always triumphs. They all lived happily ever after, united in love and hope for the future. Hey lovers, thank you for listening to this story. If you are new here, welcome to our community. I hope you enjoyed listening to this piece as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you have not done so already, please hit the subscribe button. And to support the growth of our community, give this video a big thumbs up. If you know someone who would enjoy a story like this, do not hesitate to share. Don't forget to leave a comment down below. Remember, like, share, drop a comment and subscribe. I'll take my leave now, but I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.